I'm 74 years old now. When I say that number out loud, it still sounds weird, like it's not mine. I spent so much time living for others that I never stopped to feel my own age. Today, sitting in silence, I realized that it was not time that passed too quickly. I was the one who went through my whole life without looking at myself, believing in things that have taught me without ever questioning, accepting truths that were never mine. For most of my life, I believed what I was told. I believed it was normal, that it was just like that to love meant to endure, that to be loyal was to endure in silence, even when it hurt. No one has ever called it control. They called it character, and I accepted, because I wanted to be someone correct. I wanted to be seen as someone good. I learned early on that complaining was not welcome. When something hurt me, they said I was overreacting, that other people had real problems. Then I swallowed. He kept it. I learned to be quiet. And over time, silence became part of me, as natural as breathing. So automatic that I didn't even realize when I was hurting myself anymore. Being loyal has become my identity. I was the man who never failed, which was always available, which solved, which gave in. People trusted me because they knew I didn't say no. And I confused this trust with love. I thought that if I stayed there, steady, one day it would come back to me in the same way. But the truth is that no one ever asked me if I was okay. No one wanted to know how much it cost to be this reliable man. The price was always paid in silence, on sleepless nights, in swallowed thoughts, in postponed wills, and I told myself it was worth it, that this was how a decent man lived. Today, looking back, I realize how much I was shaped by expectations that I did not choose. I didn't decide to be strong. They waited for me to go. I didn't choose to carry so much weight. They just gave it to me, and I accepted, because he thought that refusing would be selfish, because I was afraid of disappointing, fear of being seen as ungrateful. The hardest thing to admit is that I also fed all of this. Every time I kept quiet, every time I gave in, every time I said it's okay when I wasn't, I helped build the prison I lived in for decades. A prison without visible bars, but with guilt very well locked. There were times when I felt something wrong, a deep discomfort, difficult to explain, a feeling of emptiness even though I was surrounded by people. But I quickly pushed that thought away. I told myself that it was tiredness, that it would pass. It always passed, only to come back stronger later. Now at 74, these memories no longer give me rest. They come back when the house is quiet, when there is no one asking for anything, when there is too much time left to think. It is in this space that the truth begins to appear, not all at once, but slowly, like something that has always been there, waiting. I'm not telling this story to blame anyone, nor to make me a victim. I'm telling you because it took me a lifetime to understand what was really happening to me, and because maybe someone, hearing this now, still has time to realize it before. For a long time, I was told that this was love, that this was family, that this was loyalty. Today, with everything I have experienced, I can say calmly and without anger, it was not. And acknowledging this, even so late, is the first truth I have been able to say out loud. The fact that you're here, listening to this story so far, says a lot about who you are. What I'm going to share next isn't just personal. It's a truth that many live in silence and few have the courage to face. If you believe that these stories need to continue to exist and reach those who need to hear them, subscribe to the channel. This is your way of helping me keep these truths alive. I was born in a simple house, one of those where everything had its place and almost nothing was left. There was no shortage of food, but there was no room for desires either. I grew up understanding that the important thing was not to give work. My childhood was not marked by great tragedies, but by something quieter. The absence of choice. Everything was already decided, and I just kept going. My father was a strict man, not out of outright cruelty, but out of custom. He believed that to teach was to harden. My mother, always tired, did her best to keep the peace. I learned early on that disagreeing only created problems. So I observed, absorbed, and adapted. That seemed normal. It was the world I knew. I don't remember anyone asking what I felt. They asked if I had done my obligations, if I was behaving. If not, it was embarrassing the family. Feelings did not enter into these conversations. And when they appeared, they were quickly pushed under the rug as something inconvenient. There were phrases that were repeated every day. Swallow your tears. That's nothing. You need to be strong. I heard it so many times that I stopped questioning it. Strength has become a requirement, not a choice. And I obeyed, because I believed that love came along with approval. At school, I was the quiet boy, which he did not complain about, which he accepted. Adults liked me for that. They said I was mature for my age. Little did they know that that maturity was just fear of bothering. I confused praise with affection, and this would accompany me for many years. At home, helping was not an option, it was an obligation. He took on bigger tasks than me, and no one noticed the weight. When I got tired, I heard that it was just like that everyone went through this. And once again, I believed. I believed that living tired was part of the package. I didn't feel unhappy. At least he didn't know how to give that name. I just existed inside a mold. A boy who learned to fit in, not to make noise, not to ask too much. And the better I fit in, the more invisible I became to myself. There were times when I felt like saying no, small impulses, but they died before reaching the mouth. Fear came first. Fear of disappointing, fear of being seen as ungrateful, fear of losing the little affection that existed. The silence became comfortable, not because it was good, but because it was familiar. It was there that I knew how to survive. The less I said, the less conflict there was. At least that's what I thought. He did not realize that the conflict was just being pushed inwards. Today, I understand that that was the beginning of everything. There was no major trauma. There was repetition, day after day, word after word, until being quiet stopped being a choice and became an instinct, something I would carry over to every other relationship in my life. When I think of that boy now, I don't feel angry at my parents. I feel sadness for myself, because no one realized that. By teaching me to endure everything, they were also teaching me to disappear little by little. It was there, in that simple house, that I learned the greatest lesson of my life, not the one they told me out loud, but the one that was implicit in every gesture. My feelings would always come later, and I would carry that truth with me for decades. There wasn't a specific day when I was told I needed to be strong. It was something that was imposed little by little, as a silent rule of the house. I just realized that when I kept quiet, everything became easier for others. And that taught me that my role was to endure. Whenever a problem arose, the eyes turned to me, not because I was the oldest or the most prepared, but because I didn't complain. I accepted. And that, in their eyes, was strength. To mine, it was just fear of causing more trouble. I learned that being strong meant not crying, not questioning, not asking. When something hurt, I hid it. When something bothered me, I ignored it. And the better I did it, the more responsibility they put on me. It was a cycle that was never broken. I saw other people talk, get excited, say no, but it seemed too dangerous for me. They could, not me. This difference has never been explained, but it has always been felt. And I adjusted myself so as not to leave the place they gave me. Being strong also meant solving. If something needed to be done, I did it. If someone needed help, I would show up. And if I was tired, that was irrelevant. Tiredness did not match the role I was assigned. Over time, I began to believe that my worth lay in it. To be useful, to be necessary, to be the one who endures. And the idea of not fulfilling this role scared me more than the wear and tear itself. Because if I wasn't strong, who would I be? No one realized how much it consumed me inside. I myself did not know how to explain. I just felt a constant weight, as if I was always owing something, always in short supply, always needing to prove that he deserved to be there. When I made a mistake, the judgment came quickly. After all, those who are strong cannot fail. So I tried to make fewer mistakes. He demanded more from me. It nullified me a little more, all to maintain the image they created of me and that I started to defend. The truth is that I didn't choose to be that man. I was trained for this, shaped not to bother, scheduled to serve. And the more I did that, the more distant I became from any self-will. Today I realize that being strong, the way I was taught, had nothing to do with courage. It was emotional survival. It was the way I found to continue belonging without being rejected, even if it cost whole parts of me. The problem is that no one warns when this force becomes a prison. It comes disguised as praise, confidence, expectation. And before you know it, you've already spent your whole life sustaining something that never sustained you back. That's how strength stopped being quality and became an obligation. And I carried that obligation with me to every other chapter of my life, without imagining the price I would still have to pay. I was still young when I made the first promise that was not born of me. No one sat down with me to ask if I wanted to. They just said it needed to be done, that someone had to take over. And as always, everyone looked in my direction. I felt the weight before I even answered. I remember the exact feeling of that moment, a tightness in the chest mixed with fear. I wanted to say that I wasn't ready, that it was too much, but the words did not come out. They never left. In their place came the familiar silence. And soon after, the nod that would change my life. They said I was doing the right thing, that it was noble, that I was helping the family. Those words were placed upon me as a seal of approval. And I accepted, even without fully understanding what I was missing at that moment. From then on, my life began to revolve around this promise. My decisions started to be calculated based on it. What I wanted no longer mattered. What was needed came first. Always first. I told myself that it was temporary, that one day things would adjust, that then there would be room for me. This hope accompanied me for many years, even though it was never fulfilled. Whenever I showed fatigue, someone reminded me of the commitment. Whenever I hesitated, they said I couldn't leave. The word loyalty was used as a chain, and I didn't realize that I was under arrest. The most painful thing is that no one seemed to notice the sacrifice. For them, I was just fulfilling my role, a role that I never wrote, but that I learned to play perfectly. Over time, I began to feel that my life no longer belonged to me. It was as if I was just occupying a space that was expected of me, living a script decided by others. There were nights when I wondered what it would have been like if I had said no that day, but he soon pushed that thought away. He was loaded with guilt, and I didn't know how to deal with it. The promise became identity. People defined me by her, and so did I. I was the one who didn't give up. What remained? The one that lasted until the end, even without knowing exactly what that end was. Today I understand that that promise was not a gesture of love. It was the beginning of a long negotiation where only I gave in, but at that time I still believed that I deserved recognition for it. It was there that I learned a dangerous lesson. When you accept a responsibility you didn't choose, it grows inside you. And one day, without realizing it, it occupies all the space where you could have been who you really were. After that promise, I learned something that was not said out loud, but repeated many times in gestures and reactions. Complaining was not allowed. Whenever I showed fatigue, a cross look came. When I sighed too much, someone asked if I was getting weak. Little by little, I came to understand that expressing discomfort was not welcome. In the beginning, I still tried. He said he was tired, that he needed a break, that it was too heavy. The answers came quickly and always similar. They said I was exaggerating, that other people dealt with bigger problems, that I needed to be grateful for what I had. And each of these sentences pushed me a little more into silence. Over time, I began to feel ashamed of my own feelings. Ashamed to feel tired. Shame of finding it unfair. Shame of wishing for something different. It was as if feeling pain was a sign of moral weakness, not a human one. So I hid it, not only from others, but from myself. I started to measure my words before speaking. I thought twice, 3 times. He often gave up. It was easier to keep quiet than to deal with the weight of judgment. And so silence ceased to be protection and became a habit. I remember times when I needed help but didn't ask for it. I preferred to solve it alone, even when it cost me sleepless nights. Asking seemed wrong, as if I were breaking an invisible agreement that I never signed but always respected. People began to see me as someone who didn't need anything, someone who always could handle it, and that further reinforced the role I played. The less I spoke, the more they expected of me. It was a circle that was closing. I became an expert at minimizing what I felt. He said everything was fine when it wasn't. He smiled when he wanted to disappear. I replied, "Never mind," when something hurt me deeply. And little by little, I lost track of what I really felt. There were days when I felt a knot in my chest without knowing how to explain why. A silent, nameless anguish. I couldn't tell where it came from, I just knew it was there. And since I never learned to talk about it, I just carried it. The cruelest thing is that no one seemed to notice. Or maybe they did, but it would be more comfortable to pretend they didn't. After all, as long as I didn't complain, everything worked. Everything went on. The system was maintained. Today I understand that that silence was not maturity. It was conditioning. I was trained to swallow everything to keep the peace of others. And the more I did that, the more distant I became from myself. Complaining has become shame, feeling turned into guilt, and to exist beyond what was expected of me seemed too great a risk. So I remained silent, for years, for decades, until the silence began to weigh more heavily than any words I could have said. I came of age without realizing that I had never made any real choices. I just followed paths that appeared before me, always guided by what they expected, never by what I wanted. It seemed safer that way, less risky. I confused stability with the absence of conflict, without noticing how much it emptied me. Working became an obligation before becoming a dream. I accepted the first job that came up because it was the right thing to do. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to fulfill my role. The salary helped, the routine occupied the mind, and that was enough to keep the questions away. The more responsibilities I took, the farther I became from any idea of choice. Everything seemed inevitable. I told myself that it was like that for everyone, that no one lived as they wanted. This belief helped me endure the days when I felt like I was just existing, not living. Important decisions were always loaded with guilt. If something benefited me, I thought about who might feel harmed. If something gave me pleasure, I wondered if I wasn't being selfish. And, almost always, he gave up before even trying. The people around me saw a responsible, centered, reliable man, someone who never created problems. I received praise for it, and they reinforced the path I was already stuck on. The more they praised me for holding on, the more I endured. As time went on, I began to feel a strange disconnect. It was as if my life was happening without me. I kept schedules, solved pending issues, helped those in need, but something inside me remained in suspense, waiting for something that never came. There were moments of silence when I wondered who I would be if I had chosen differently, but these questions were always accompanied by fear. Fear of not recognizing the answer, afraid of finding out that I had given up too much. I got used to living on automatic. Waking up, working, complying, returning home, repeat. The fatigue was not just physical. It was a fatigue that came from never allowing herself to stop and ask if that path still made sense. The most curious thing is that no one seemed to notice my absence within their own lives. Or maybe they realized it and thought it was normal. After all, I was always there, always present, always available, even when I didn't know what for. Growing up, for me, was not gaining autonomy. It was learning to adapt better and better to what they expected. I matured without choosing, I grew old without deciding, and I moved forward believing that this was the price of adulthood. Today I understand that not choosing is also a choice, but it's the choice that others make for you. And I spent many years accepting this, without imagining how much this silent renunciation would still take a toll on me in the future. I got married because it was the next step. There was not a great moment of certainty, nor a sweeping passion that made me lose my ground. There was expectation, there was silent pressure, there was a feeling that it was about time, that this was what was expected of me. And I followed, as I always did. I liked the person I married, that's true. There was respect, there was companionship. But marriage was not born of a free choice. It was born from the same place where so many other decisions in my life came from, the obligation to fulfill a role. I believed that love could also be learned over time. In the beginning, I did what I knew how to do best. I made an effort. I gave in. I avoided conflicts. Whenever a problem arose, I would rather swallow than argue. He thought that keeping the peace was a sign of maturity. I didn't realize that once again I was disappearing so that everything would work. Decisions within marriage rarely passed through me. I agreed. I adapted. I adjusted my desires to the space that was left. I told myself that this was normal, that every marriage required sacrifices, and I was always willing to be the first to sacrifice. Over the years, I felt a distance grow. Not a physical distance, but an emotional one. I was there, present, fulfilling my responsibilities, but something inside me remained silent. I didn't know how to talk about it because I had never learned it. Whenever I thought about questioning, the blame came first. Guilt for thinking I was being unfair. Guilt for thinking of me. Guilt for wishing for something different. So I kept quiet. Once again, outsiders saw a stable marriage, a dedicated man, an organized home. I received praise for it, and they reinforced the idea that I was doing the right thing. No one saw what was not said. Not even I could explain it. There were moments of loneliness even though he was accompanied. Times when I felt like I wasn't really seen, but I accepted. After all, I had learned that expecting too much from others was dangerous. Better not to create expectations. Over time, I began to confuse routine with connection, living with intimacy, being together with being understood. And so I kept going, believing that this was the most that life offered. Today, I understand that that marriage, like so many other things, was built on loyalty, not on choice. And loyalty, when it is not shared, becomes a burden, a weight that I carried in silence for many years. I don't blame the other person. I was also responsible. I was the one who never said what I felt. I was the one who accepted less than I needed. But at that time, I still didn't know how to do it differently. It was there that I realized, much later, that even in the closest bonds, I kept repeating the same pattern, existing to sustain, not to be sustained. And this was beginning to take a toll too high. Over the years, giving my all has become something automatic. I didn't think anymore before offering help, time, or energy. He simply did it. It was as if my value was directly linked to how much I could give to others. And the more I gave, the less I wondered why. At work, I was the first to arrive and the last to leave. I took on tasks that were not mine. I solved problems that no one wanted to face. They said I was dedicated, reliable, essential. I heard these words as confirmation that I was on the right path, even though I felt a tiredness that never went away. At home, the pattern was repeated. I sustained, organized, solved. If something needed to be done, I did it even before they asked for it. Not out of pure generosity, but out of fear. Fear of disappointing. Fear of being seen as insufficient. Fear of losing the little recognition he received. The curious thing is that no one seemed to notice the effort. Or maybe they realized and just got used to it. When you give too much for too long, it stops being a gesture and becomes an expectation. And expectations are not accompanied by gratitude. There were days when I felt completely drained, even though I couldn't pinpoint a specific cause. It wasn't just the tired body. It was the feeling of always owing something, even after having given everything. A deep tiredness, difficult to explain. I rarely stopped to think about what I wanted. And when I stopped, the question made me uncomfortable. It was easier to keep busy than to face the emptiness that appeared when silence appeared. So I kept giving, doing, solving. People started to look for me only when they needed me, and I accepted. He said yes. Always yes. Even when it meant giving up the little time I had for myself. I convinced myself that this was normal, that this was how life worked. Little by little, I began to feel that my presence was only valuable as long as I was useful. When I didn't solve it, it seemed like it didn't exist. That realization hurt, but I pushed it away. I didn't know how to deal with it without dismantling everything I had built. I've become an expert at ignoring my own limits. He didn't recognize signs of exhaustion. He didn't respect tiredness. There was always someone in need of more. There was always something more urgent than me. Today, I realized that I gave without knowing why because I was never taught how to receive. Receive attention, care, consideration. All this seemed strange to me, almost wrong. I felt more comfortable in the role of the supporter than in the role of the supporter. Giving everything without knowing why kept me busy for many years, but it also took me away from myself. And the more I gave, the harder it became to realize that, deep down, I was trying to fill a void that should never have existed. It wasn't at once that the body began to complain. It was slowly, almost politely, like everything else in my life. First came a fatigue that did not go away with rest. Then, an unwillingness to get out of bed. I told myself that it was age, that it was too much work, that it was normal. It was always normal. There were days when I woke up already exhausted, even after a full night's sleep. My body was there, but it felt heavy, late, as if it was always trying to keep up with something I could no longer support. Still, I kept going. I always followed. I started to feel pain that I couldn't explain, a tightness in the chest in moments of silence, a constant lump in the throat, a strange pressure that appeared when I needed to say yes once again, but I never associated it with what I felt. I never learned how to make that connection. People around me said I needed to rest more, that I was working too hard. I nodded, but inside I knew that it wasn't just that. Resting the body did not solve something that was deeper, something I didn't know how to name. I kept pushing my limits as I always did, ignoring signs, silencing discomforts. I had spent my whole life doing this. Why would it be any different now? I believed that if I stopped, everything would fall apart, and I couldn't allow that. There was a moment when I realized that my body reacted before my mind. Before any commitment, he was already contracting. Before any request, something in me was already closed. It was as if my body was trying to protect me from something I refused to see. Even so, I continued to fulfill everything that was expected of me. He canceled appointments. He postponed breaks. It minimized symptoms. He said that everything was fine, because that was always the easiest phrase to say, and also the most dangerous. In silence, I began to feel afraid. Fear of getting really sick. Fear of not being able to cope. Fear of needing someone and not knowing how to ask. This fear was mixed with shame, creating a weight that was difficult to carry alone. There were days when I would sit quietly and just breathe, trying to figure out why I felt so empty, even though I had done everything right. I followed the rules. I kept promises. I was loyal. So why did something inside me seem broken? Today, I understand that my body was just saying what I could never say in words. He was tired of holding what was not fair, tired of carrying responsibilities that have never been shared, tired of being strong all the time. At that time, however, I was not yet ready to listen. I preferred to call it tiredness, age, phase. Anything was better than admitting that I was paying too high a price for a loyalty that only went in one direction. That's how the body began to charge. Not with a shout, but with a constant warning. A warning that I would ignore for a while longer, until something happened and forced me to finally stop. The day I had to stop was not dramatic at first glance. There were no sirens, no running. It was something simple, almost banal. A malaise that forced me to sit down. A different tiredness. Too heavy to ignore. For the first time, I realized that my body was not asking for rest. I was demanding. I remember being alone when this happened. The silent house, the clock ticking the hours too slowly. I sat down and waited for the sensation to pass, as I always did. But it did not pass. It was. And along with it came an uncomfortable clarity. I wasn't well. I decided to ask for help. It wasn't easy. The phone weighed down in my hand as if I was about to do something wrong. I called a close person. He did not answer. I called another one. She said she was busy. I hung up, one number at a time, trying not to take it personally. Meanwhile, I thought about how many times I had been available. How many times have I dropped everything to solve other people's problems? How many times have I appeared without being called? And there, at that moment, I was alone. Not by chance, but by default. When I finally managed to talk to someone, I heard that it didn't seem like anything serious, that I should rest, that later, we would talk. I hung up with an automatic thanks, the one we learn to give even when we feel something is wrong. I spent that whole day in silence, not only external, but internal. Something inside me began to organize itself in a different way. For the first time, I didn't try to justify others. I didn't try to understand. I only observed the emptiness left by absence. In the following days, no one showed up. There were quick messages, superficial questions, no real presence, no outstretched hands. And that hurt more than any physical symptoms. Because there was no doubt there. The answer was clear. I realized that my loyalty has always been functional. I was important while I solved, while sustaining, while facilitating. When I needed to be taken care of, I stopped being a priority. Not out of explicit malice, but because they never saw me as someone who needed it. This realization took me off my feet. There was no immediate anger. There was sadness. A deep, mature sadness, difficult to explain. It was like looking at life itself and realizing that it had been built on a foundation that never sustained me. I kept mentally reliving old situations, moments when I ignored my limits, days when I put myself in the background, and for the first time, I didn't feel proud of it. I felt sorry for myself. Not a weak penalty, but a belated compassion. In that enforced silence, something began to break inside me, not violently, but definitive. The idea that I needed to continue like this lost strength. For the first time, I didn't want to prove anything to anyone anymore. There was no great speech, nor a clear decision at that time. There was only one new feeling, that I had spent too much time being loyal to others and too little time being loyal to myself. It was there, when I needed it and no one came, that the truth began to form. Still confused, still painful, but impossible to ignore. And I knew, even without admitting it, that after that day nothing would be the same as before. This is the hardest part to share. To speak of this means to expose something that I have spent my whole life hiding. To accept the emotional cost of saying out loud what almost destroyed me in silence. If you've come this far, it's because you understand that staying still hurts. But keeping quiet hurts more. Subscribe to the channel not as a support for me, but as a gesture so that voices like this continue to exist and do not disappear when the truth begins to weigh. After that day when I needed it and no one came, something inside me could no longer settle down. It was not revolt, nor immediate sadness. It was a constant restlessness, as if a question was echoing inside me without finding an answer. I went on with my days, but I could no longer pretend that everything was in place. I began to revisit my life in silence, like someone flipping through an old album with excessive care. Each memory was accompanied by a detail that I had previously ignored. I saw myself present in other people's difficult moments, always available, always willing. And at the same time, I saw myself absent from myself. The loneliness of that episode wasn't the worst part. What really hurt was realizing that it made sense. It wasn't bad luck. It was no coincidence. It was a consequence of years of putting me in a place where I only existed as long as I was useful. And this realization fell on me like a weight difficult to describe. I realized that I had never been a priority. I was the safe option, the support guaranteed, the right presence when something went wrong. But I was never careful. I was never the lap. I was never the concern. And understanding this at age 74 required more courage than any sacrifice I had ever made. I spent nights awake trying to justify people. I told myself that everyone was busy, that no one had an obligation to take care of me. But this explanation did not hold up for long, because I never spoke of obligation. I have always spoken of reciprocity, something that little by little became clear that it never existed. What shook me the most was realizing that I stayed out of fear, not out of conscious love, not by true choice, but for fear of being left behind, fear of losing my place, fear of discovering that without service, I might have no value at all. This fear silently guided almost all my decisions. This realization brought a different pain, a mature pain. without drama, but deep. It was like living a belated mourning, the mourning for the person I could have been, for the words I never said, for the limits that I never imposed when there was still time. For a few days, I felt completely lost. He didn't know what to make of that newfound truth. It was not accompanied by solutions, just clarity, and clarity sometimes hurts more than comfortable ignorance. But along with the pain, something began to change. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for thinking about myself. I felt no shame for acknowledging my tiredness. It was as if a part of me, which had been dormant for decades, was finally waking up. I still didn't know how to change. I still didn't know what to do differently. But I knew one thing. I could no longer pretend that this life served me. The truth had broken something irreversible inside me, and there was no turning back. The loneliness was difficult, yes, but the truth was harsher, because it forced me to face my own story without filters. And at the same time, it gave me something I never had before, the chance to choose, even late, even with fear. It was at this point that I understood that some truths come too late to change the past, but they still arrive in time to change the rest. And I knew, deep down, that this was the beginning of something I had been avoiding all my life. After the truth settled in me, nothing else happened on automatic. Each order that came in seemed to carry a different weight, as if now I could see the hidden cost behind each yes. Before, I answered almost without thinking. Now the body reacted first, as if asking for caution. The first no came neither strong nor confident. He left quietly, hesitantly, almost apologizing for existing. My heart raced the instant the word left my mouth. I felt butterflies in my stomach, as if I was breaking something sacred, something I had been trained to respect all my life. I expected a harsh reaction, a scolding, a trial, something that would confirm that I was wrong. But what came was the strangeness, an uncomfortable silence, a confused look, as if the person in front of me was trying to understand who I had suddenly become. Some insisted, as they always did. They repeated the request in another way, using a softer, almost affectionate tone, certain that I would eventually give in. That insistence made me realize how much my yes was always guaranteed. It never needed to be asked carefully. When I kept the no, the environment changed. There was no direct confrontation, but something moved. It was as if I had broken an invisible rule, a rule that only existed because I had always obeyed it, and that made me deeply uncomfortable. The guilt came soon after, like an old acquaintance. She tried to convince me that I was being selfish, cold, ungrateful. It brought back old memories, phrases that I have heard all my life. Have you always been like this? That doesn't look like you. Each of these words hit deeply. For a few moments, I thought about going back, to say that it was a joke, to apologize, to fix the discomfort I had created myself. But something in me, perhaps too tired to keep giving in, decided to stand firm for the first time. In the following days, I noticed small changes. People who came to me frequently started to call less. Invitations disappeared. The presence was decreasing. That hurt. I won't deny it. But along with the pain came a confirmation that was hard to ignore. At the same time, something unexpected happened. A few people reacted differently. They asked if I was okay, if something had changed. For the first time, someone seemed interested in me, not just in what I did. This confused me deeply. Saying no made me exhausted. Not because it was difficult per se, but because I was facing decades of conditioning. It was like learning a new language after being old. Every word required effort, attention, courage, but it also brought a strange sense of dignity. I still didn't know where that change would take me. I was not clear about the future. I just knew that something had changed definitively. The no, I said, opened a door that I had never dared to touch. I understood at that moment that imposing limits does not erase who I was. It doesn't invalidate my story. It just gives me a chance to not repeat the same pattern until the end. And, even with fear, even late, this chance began to seem necessary. After I started saying no, silence took on a new meaning. It was no longer the silence I used to protect myself, but the silence that came from outside. People who had always been present began to disappear little by little, as if my value had diminished along with my availability. At first, I tried to deny what was happening. I told myself that it was a coincidence, that everyone was busy, but the days passed and the pattern became too clear to ignore. The less I did, the less I was remembered. It hurt more than I imagined. Not because I wanted attention, but because it confirmed an old fear. Many bonds existed only because I supported them. There was no room for me as a person, only as a function. There were times when I thought about going back, to resume the known role. It would be so much easier. It was enough to say yes again, to be available, to solve it. I knew exactly how to do it. It was a safe path, even if it was painful. But something in me resisted. maybe because of tiredness, perhaps because of belated dignity. I wondered if I would rather continue to be surrounded by people or finally recognize myself in the mirror. This question had no easy answer. Some farewells were not declared. They happened in silence, without fights, without explanations, only absence. And this kind of loss is difficult to elaborate because there is no clear moment of closure, just a gradual void. At the same time, I realized that losing these people didn't destroy me as I feared. It did, yes, but it didn't cancel me out. There was a strange sense of relief mixed with sadness, as if I was leaving something heavy behind. I started to have more time, more silence, more space. At first, it scared me. I didn't know what to do with myself without being busy with the needs of others. It was like relearning how to exist. I began to notice small things that had previously gone unnoticed. The rhythm of the day, my own thoughts, the fatigue gradually diminished. None of this was grandiose, but it was real. For the first time, I was present in my own life. A few people remained, not because I did anything for them, but because they wanted to be there. These bonds, although rare, had a different weight. They were quieter, simpler, more true. I understood that losing people is part of any real change, and that sometimes these losses are not failure, but a consequence. Consequence of no longer accepting less than you deserve. In the end, the choice became clear, even though it was painful. I could remain surrounded and empty, or more alone and whole. And for the first time in my life, I chose not to lose myself again. After I accepted the losses, something inside me began to slow down. It was not immediate, nor easy to understand. It was like when the noise suddenly disappears and you only notice it because the body relaxes. For the first time in many years, I wasn't reacting to the expectations of others. I was just living my own days. The house became quieter, it's true. Some empty spaces betrayed recent absences. But that silence no longer oppressed me. He didn't charge me anything. It was a clean silence, different from the one that accompanied me for decades. That silence didn't require me to hide. He welcomed me. I began to realize how much my routine has always been dictated by external demands. Now I chose. She chose to wake up later when her body asked for it. He chose not to answer the phone when he didn't feel like talking. Small choices that, for me, had the weight of a late release. There were times when I would just sit and watch the day go by. The light coming in through the window, the distant sound of the street, my own rhythm breathing unhurriedly. Before, I would have felt guilty about it. Now, he felt presence. For the first time, I was whole there. Guilt still tried to show up, like an old habit that refuses to die. Sometimes it came in the form of thinking, you should be doing something. Other times it came as a light tightness in the chest. But she no longer bossed me around. I recognized it, took a deep breath and let it go. I began to look at my story with more compassion. I didn't reproach myself for taking so long. I understood that I did what was possible with the tools they gave me. I spent a lifetime believing that nullifying myself was a virtue. Unlearning this took time, and that's okay. The few people who remained began to relate to me in a different way. The conversations no longer revolved only around problems to be solved. We talked about simple things, of the day, of life. There was more listening, less demanding, less weight. I learned something important during this period. Peace is not being surrounded, it is being coherent. While I lived in disagreement with myself, no company filled the void. Now, even with fewer people around, I felt more complete. There was loneliness, yes, but it was no longer accompanied by abandonment. It was a chosen solitude, sometimes even necessary. A space where I could think, feel, remember, without having to justify myself. A space that, for the first time, was mine. I started to enjoy my own company. That still sounds weird when I say it out loud. I spent my whole life running away from myself, keeping myself busy so as not to listen to what I felt. Now, I allowed myself to be with myself without fear. The truth that once tore me apart inside began to become a foundation, a simple, honest, firm base. I no longer needed to prove strength. I no longer needed to support anyone at the expense of myself. I just needed to remain attentive so as not to abandon myself again. That is how peace came, not as a prize, nor as an exaggerated happy ending. It came as a consequence of choosing myself for the first time, even late, even with losses, even with scars. Still, it has arrived. Today, when I look back, I don't just see mistakes or losses. I see a man who did the best he could with what he believed to be right. I spent many years thinking that my story was made of obligations, when, in fact, it was made of fear. Fear of disappointing, fear of being alone, fear of discovering who I would be without serving others. It took me a lifetime to understand that loyalty shouldn't hurt, that compromise should not require constant silence, that love should not cost one's own identity. These truths seem obvious when spoken now, but they have been invisible to me for decades. There were times when I wondered if it wasn't too late, if at the age of 74 it still made sense to change something. If not, it would be better to just accept it, as I have always done. But I realized that this question was just another way to give up on myself. The truth is that there is no right age to respect yourself. There is no deadline for recognizing limits. While we are alive, we are still in time. And this understanding changed the way I started to see each day I had left. I have not recovered the past. I didn't correct all the choices. Some losses are definitive. Some people never come back. Some opportunities are left behind. But that didn't negate the value of what I learned. It did not nullify the dignity of finally being honest with myself. Today, my life is smaller on the outside and bigger on the inside. I have fewer bonds, less noise, fewer imposed expectations. On the other hand, I have more clarity, more presence, more truth. And this is worth more than any late approval. If anyone is listening to this story right now and recognizing themselves in it, I want them to know one thing. Silence charges high interest. The longer you wait to hear yourself, the harder it is to find yourself. But it is never impossible. It is not necessary to break everything. There is no need for confrontation or revenge. Sometimes change starts with just a limit. A no said with fear. An accepted discomfort. A small step towards yourself. I learned that being good to everyone doesn't mean being fair to yourself. And that spending your whole life trying to please can leave you surrounded and yet deeply alone. No loyalty is worth that price. Today I choose myself every day. It's not always easy. Sometimes guilt still comes out. But now I know how to recognize it as part of the past, not as a rule of the present. I don't need to punish myself anymore to belong. If there is something I want to put on record with this story, it is this. Some truths wait a lifetime to be told. They arrive late, yes, but when they arrive, they still liberate. And even after everything, I can say calmly and without regret. Understanding this at 74 years old did not erase my history. It only allowed me, finally, to live what was left of it. In peace, in silence, and whole. If this story touched something in you, share this video. Not as an automatic gesture, but as a way to reach those who still believe that holding on in silence is normal. There are patterns that only begin to change when someone lends their voice to those who cannot yet speak. And sharing them can be exactly that bridge. I'll stay here reading every comment. Tell me, from which city or country are you watching? And what about this story stayed with you? Reading these answers really matters to me. They don't get lost, they arrive.